Hi, I'm Chris.
And I'm Linda.
Welcome to another episode of Homegrown Families, where we're going to speak about a marriage tip.
A marriage tip. I gave Chris the choice. I was like, okay, we're going to film something about marriage. What do you want to talk about? And you were like,
Let's talk about, baby, let's talk about you and me.
well, the way you said it was you want to talk about
Something about intimacy or
Intimacy,
passion and
passion.
burning love and sex. Let's talk about sex. So that's a real marriage thing we
it
should
is a
talk
real
about.
marriage. Yeah.
I just want to hear what you have to say about sex.
One of your fantasies, huh? To have me on film talking about sex.
You said this.
So I think we should talk about intimacy and like keeping that
fire
fire burning.
All right, so we're going to talk about intimacy, which is exciting. I'm just getting myself worked up.
It doesn't take much.
And we've completed our episode. This is a topic that a lot of times is not talked about, not communicated on, especially from the church. There's a lot of reasons for that, obviously. When it's said and done, you have a lot of freedom and beauty in your marriage to grow in intimacy. But here's a couple things to keep in mind. When we do all our pre-Cana talks for our diocese, one of the main things that we talk about is that there's a difference between a sacramental marriage and just hooking up. People think that intimacy is the end in and of itself, but it's actually a sign and a part of the communion of these two who've come together to be one flesh. And I kind of really like the beauty of the church and her perspective on this, that the love between a husband and wife is meant to reflect the love of God in time. And so it's not reduced down to just an act, a physical act that is amazing in and of itself, but it's more than that. And because it's more than that, we get to talk about intimacy in a bigger way than just two people attracted to each other, having passion for one another, and finding great consolation in each other. Thank you, Linda.
I don't know what to add to that.
So the thing is that in a marriage, a lot of times there's hang-ups and frustrations when it comes to intimacy. Some people come into a marriage with the understanding that almost sex is bad, that somehow intimacy between a husband and a wife, physical intimacy, is frowned upon. It's not the ideal of a union. But that's ridiculous, because in the incarnational union between a man and a wife, you do reflect the intimacy of God, that life-giving possibility that can happen when two people love each other. It's almost like two worlds colliding, that one world, and then the possibility of introducing a whole new life is miraculous.
But you also have the other extreme where people think that they come into a marriage thinking that is the end all of the marriage. And
Right.
sometimes in unfortunate situations where that physical intimacy is taken away for injury or what illness or whatever, that their marriage has fallen, their marriage has collapsed. It's no longer able to continue as it was. But that's not true either, because intimacy is more than just sex.
That's right.
And so, but I think that the real struggle that we see in most marriages, that most marriages can relate to, is the way intimacy goes stale after a while. Life gets busy, stress, you're exhausted, and you just start taking each other for granted. And so that's one of the first things that gets set aside, because when we get together, our time is so limited. We're dealing with kids' schedules, we're dealing with money issues, just trying to figure out what's for dinner, and like you have your goals that you're working on, I have my goals that I'm working on, and it's so easy to just start passing each other like ships in the night, right? That you're not connecting. And so we often want to encourage that is so important in a marriage, to continue to work on intimacy, both emotional intimacy and then physical intimacy.
What's interesting is that a lot of times, if you forget the emotional part of intimacy, then it does become some sort of rote act, and it can be a bit of a problem in a marriage. So it is important to have the two. One of the things that Linda and I will do, without getting too weird, is simply put, we'll have spoil Linda Rotten Day. And for no reason whatsoever, I'll just say, Linda, what do you want to do today? And we'll go out. Maybe we'll go shop for something, or maybe we'll go have lunch together. We just get to be together, explore. There's no obligation and rules. We can just have fun and see where it takes us. Ultimately, that, and some people might call that kind of emotional intimacy or this time together as part of foreplay, but that is a very big part of the way a marriage is going to flourish and thrive when it comes to physical intimacy, because without that, the physicality of it becomes a little bit reduced. And what I simply mean by that is that there is something about the exchange physically between a husband and wife that must be connected to the person, and that person as a whole, and not just that person as an object. In fact, I would think that that's actually sinful, is if they're just only objectified. Although I've often said to Linda, I wish she would objectify me a lot more, but that's a different conversation.
I mean, there are differences between men and women. That's something that every couple, every relationship needs to understand and talk about it. And that's maybe another issue, is that couples aren't talking about it. You need to set aside actually a time to be intimate, again, in many different forms, and then set aside time to talk about it. If you need to talk about it, I think that we assume, we see on movies that intimacy is something that's passion driven and it's natural, and if it's not passion driven, then it's broken. But
or unbridled, like I can't control myself.
Right.
Oh my gosh. And then you look at your marriage and you think, oh my gosh, I can totally control myself. So
right.
We must have lost something. And some of that is just, you're trying to compare your relationship, your life, with something that's unrealistic, which is ultimately the problem of pornography, which is a great struggle and detriment in a lot of marriages, because it presents false understandings of relational intimacy that are very difficult and unnatural sometimes even to have in your marriage encounter. I think one of the thoughts that I was having here with regards to passion and intimacy in marriage is that there are going to be seasons in your relationship where it's a little bit more intense and you feel like you're in the zone and everything's great and you're attracted physically to each other. You have that passion. It seems effortless. And then there are times and seasons where it's a little bit difficult like that. And in both ways, you need to nurture and foster intimacy. It's a lot like prayer. You can't only pray when you feel like praying, that there's something about that relational intimacy with God that you're invited into. And if you only wait for the times that you're feeling it, then you're not going to pray very much. And so some of the encouragement that we give to married couples is just start opening up the possibility of having more intimacy physically with each other, which allows then for some emotional dialogue that can happen, especially for a man. I'm glad you could be here for my conversation on
I contributed.
Physical intimacy. Usually, the guy is going to think, I definitely wish we could have more sex. And oftentimes, the woman might be thinking, my gosh, is that all he thinks about? The answer is yes.
That's all he
That's
thinks
all
about.
he thinks about. At least until he gets older, and then
That's still all he thinks about.
and then that's all he thinks about.
But again, understanding, being compassionate with each other in our individuality of who we are, both as men and women, and then being compassionate with our time, and like understanding our situation and not judging against an unrealistic expectation, that's unrealistic image, and talking, communicating, and just sharing with each other and building that intimacy. That's what we're going to encourage. Just work on intimacy. Make sure you don't let it slip by.
I'm just going to try to be a little real here for a second, a little bit. I mean, I'm trying to be very careful with my wording.
Really?
I am, actually. Did you not pick up on that? The thing is that I feel like in a lot of ways that couples rob themselves of that physical intimacy because it's not the ultimate ideal scenario and situation. And so oftentimes it can be neglected, as we've talked about, with a lot of responsibilities and obligations. And sometimes what that does is it sets up marriages for some really difficult times, not not that this is justifiable, but a lot of guys begin to look into other directions when they don't feel like they're being satisfied at home. And this is the great tragedy, because selfishness will breed to more selfishness. And ultimately, what I think we found in our marriage is that if you try to build your intimacy on selfishness, whether it's I don't want to have sex, or whether it's I want to have sex all the time, which Linda's not saying I don't want to have sex, and I am saying I want to have sex all the time. I am going to say that, but the truth is that you can't build a relationship just on that particular selfishness. You have to have a giving and a taking, and I think that's one of the great successes of our marriage is that there are times where we've looked at each other and said, wouldn't it be great if we could have physical intimacy? But if we do, we know we're going to end up having a child. This is not the best time for us to have a child. Let's implement self-control. We'll go about our business. Let's go shopping. Let's do something. Let's clean the house. Do you see what I'm saying? This idea of selfishness, I think, is unfortunately very prevalent in relationships. And when either side becomes more and more of an expert in that selfishness, then they're going to rob each other of intimacy. Thanks, Linda. Perfect. I just think I wanted to say that. I mean, I just think
You did say it.
I said it.
Good. And it's going to be recorded for all time.
Jesus. There's a lot more we need to talk about. We'll be back.
Thanks for watching.